Hey guys.
So we're back. We clearly still have momentum for this, right?
Yeah, definitely. We've just been wrestling with the dog and the kids.
child.
Just making sure. I say kids because, you know,
What?
it's two of them.
Yeah, but this one's not giving us any issues.
This one is not giving us issues through the child itself, but it's coming across. Best believe the child is making its presence felt.
Can you imagine? I'm hormonal. Nuri is very excited, very energetic.
Oh.
Then there's Lila. So Lila
It's a mess.
barks the whole
day.
time. And her and Nuri play, and then after playing they fight. So it's just like
It's chaos.
and I can't go out for a drive. So yeah. Anyway, do you know what today's topic is about?
I don't know what today's topic. As we've established, I have no idea.
Don't do this.
I just, but I'm here as a team player.
Introduce the topic of
And
today, please.
I don't know it.
Brendan, show the people that we
I know
are.
it's about sex.
we go.
I don't know what exactly.
So the heading of today is it's not just sex.
You might
Do you remember?
You might have said that.
Okay, explain why we decided to do this topic.
We decided to do this topic because we've just been talking amongst ourselves, where we just talk about just
Lila.
reflecting on our lives and just the effects that sex has brought upon our lives, and from a male perspective, from a female perspective, and it's two different worlds.
Yeah.
We're not comparing, we're not saying that it's the same, but just kind of trading notes and seeing what it actually means, like what sex actually does to the human being, what God actually created it for, and whether or not we've used it for that purpose, and what the, I want to say, consequences of not using it for God's desired purpose have been.
Yeah. So these videos that we've been doing, our aim is not just to cater for married people, but I think especially single people, because it will be great preparation for marriage. And also to maybe avoid mistakes that we've made, or to be better.
And we made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, to be better prepared. So we're gonna try to be as transparent as possible without being like sharing information just for entertainment purposes, but actually sharing our stories to help out, not to encourage anything. And do you want to share how your relationship with sex started?
Okay, so obviously I grew up in church. My dad's a pastor, so naturally my whole idea around sex was biblical. It's always been, and I was saving myself up for marriage. When you save it up. And unfortunately I didn't make it. Spoiler alert. But even though I didn't make it, I lost my virginity later on in my life. I think I was 19, so I just gotten into varsity, and to this day I really think it's one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, because it just took me down a path that I really think I shouldn't have gone down. Even though now in retrospect I look at the lessons and I'm learning the lessons, and I'm accepting that okay, that was maybe the plan for my life, but there's certain things that I feel like you can do without, and for me that's what it did. I think it just, first of all, it drew me further and further away from God. That's the one noticeable thing, and it just changed my personality. And now just coming to learn my personality, you know, I realized that I was not the same person, you know. And I think now realizing, getting to know, speaking to you about soul ties and what having sex with people actually does, and I realized that a lot of it was that. A lot of pieces of me were being left behind. And as a guy, you know, it's like it's something that we've just normalized. We've normalized just being sexually active. We've made it a cool thing to do. It's like you get praise from the guys. You get, you know, it's like you become this bad boy and whatnot. And honestly, the price that you pay emotionally and spiritually, I think is like it's not worth it. It's really not worth it. So for me, that was my experience, and just kind of figuring it out to get back to that person who was like 16 years old, devoted to God, wanting to do it the right way, wanting to do it God's way. Granted, I didn't understand really what it means to have like sexual intercourse with someone. I didn't understand that it's actually kind of like being married to that person.
It's actually being married.
It's becoming one flesh.
Yeah.
And so just getting into it blindly because of either peer pressure or because of your own curiosity or feeling like you're on top of the world. Obviously after that, after varsity, the whole idols things where happened to, you know, to my, I say happened, but I joined idols and that went quite well, and it kind of blew me up in a way that I never expected. And so the two things coming together, me experimenting in this new life of being sexually active and kind of me getting attention from females who would have never looked at me, it just took me down the worst path, and like I said, furthered me from God and just changed me as a person, like my personality and who I was. And getting back to that place has just been the hardest thing to do. But I just hope that through that lesson or through our stories, we can actually help someone who hasn't gone down that road, and people who have gone down that road can realize that it's okay, you can still come back. You know, you can't go too far where God can't find you, where God can't like literally fetch you. There's a song that's called Reckless Love, and it just talks about how God leaves 99 sheep to go fetch the one sheep that is lost. And that's how I feel about my life. You know, I feel like God chased after me and continues to chase after me to find me whenever I'm lost.
And just before I get into my story, how were you towards your girlfriend or girlfriends then, relationship wise, compared before you had sex compared to after you had sex? How did you treat women? How did you see them?
I'd say in high school I was very romantic, extremely romantic. I'm still romantic now, but I was extremely romantic because my idea of relationships were rom-coms, you know? Because I mean, I don't know how you guys grow up or you grew up, but our family, we didn't really talk about dating girls or what it means to take a girl out on a date, or how you treat,
sorry guys,
or how you treat women, you know?
Yeah.
So all I had was pretty much the TV shows that we watched and movies and whatever. So luckily, I mean, movies that time, they were really pushing this rom-com thing. Was heavy.
They were decent.
Yeah, some of the best romantic comedies are from that period, like the early 2000s, mid 2000s. Like it's like a vibe.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I was exposed to, and that's how I was approaching it. That okay, you have to sweet talk the girl, you have to compliment her, you have to respect her, you know, and you have to chase after her and that sort of thing. But for me, I always knew that sex was that line that I'm not gonna cross. So just getting into it, I was never open to that. That was never the end goal. My end goal was always, I just want to experience this love. I want to experience, like I have a crush on this person. It was very, very innocent.
Yeah.
As opposed to afterwards, then sex becomes the end goal. Before you even see someone as someone you'd potentially like to build a life with, is now you thinking like, oh wow, I can't wait to get this person in bed.
Sure.
So it's like that's where your mind shifts.
You dehumanize a person.
Almost like you objectify people.
Yeah.
And so now it works the opposite way. It's like now, after getting what you want, you realize that, this person is actually really cool. Whereas you were supposed to realize how cool this person was before, and then you were supposed to commit yourself and then enjoy what God would either have planned for you or not if it doesn't work out. But it's like everything works in reverse. So now you're starting at the end, working your way to the beginning, and that's like no way to approach anything.
Sure. So from my perspective, if you watched my previous video, you heard me share my story about how sex started for me, and it was on a very negative note, and sex for me became a way of control without even realizing that. I only realized that last year, and so basically after being sexually abused, whenever I got into relationship, I guess I became a man about things, because most girls, I don't know what their thought process is. I think girls tend to wait a little longer. We are the opposite. Girls tend to wait a little longer before engaging in sex, and girls are more interested in actually getting into the relationship. Whereas when I got into relationships, like sex was on the cards. I think subconsciously it was a way of saying, let me give it to you before you take it away from me.
Sure.
You know? So that was my experience, and I got myself into endless, and I said in my previous video, I don't know if I can call it promiscuity, but every relationship I was in my teens, resulted in a sexual exchange. And then I realize now, speaking of soul ties, that the guy who took my virginity was a promiscuous person. So which means that spirit that person had was transferred. That was transferred to me, and that's just the person I came to. And that's what sex does to you. Until every single person you have sex with, it's not just sex. You get married to that person without a ceremony.
Sure.
You create a bond and a tie, and you take something from that person. That's why when you realize, like what you speak about, your personality changing, is that you see yourself, all of a sudden you have a temper and you never had a temper. Maybe the person you slept with had a temper, or things aren't going well, your purpose is delayed because of the person you were with, or you become promiscuous, you objectify people. So every time you have an encounter with someone, you leave something in them and they leave something in you.
And most importantly, they take something
from you. Yeah, so every time you enter what you think is a one-night stand, you're making an exchange. You're tying your soul to somebody. So going back to my story, I was tied to that person and every other person I slept with. And it wasn't until I fully came into that realization and started studying on soul ties that those soul ties were broken, that my life could change.
Sure.
So it's not enough to just say, okay, sex before marriage is wrong, let's stop it, and that's it. You have to break the soul tie. You have to pray, you have to release that person, you need to confess those people. In fact, you have to name them one by one. You know, I had to sit down and literally say, God, release me from this person, this person, this person. As no matter how shameful it is, you have to ask the Lord to release you from these people so that sexual tie isn't there. And for me, I guess I just saw men as projects.
Sure.
You know, I just saw men as these projects, but the most important thing is that I have to be in control, because that's what sexual abuse does to you. It takes away your control. It takes away your power. So all my life, everything I've done was to prove that I'm in control and I have the power.
Sure.
Until I had to confront that. So when we see culture, I'm extremely passionate about this, because I was a girl who experienced things I wasn't supposed to experience at that tender age. So when I see so many girls being influenced to get into relationships they're not supposed to get into, when sex is taken so lightly, I can literally feel my heart break, and I can't imagine what God feels like.
Sure.
Because I know the consequences.
Yeah.
I know the consequences. And so it's not just sex, and that's why I wanted to do this video, that it's there's more to it. It's not just sex. There's ties created, and it really can destroy your life, and it can affect you even in your marriage, because your views on sex are now different. So whereas sex is supposed to be this pure, beautiful thing, for you perhaps it's this thing of it's objectifying or whatever. For me, it's this control game. You understand? And now the purity, even in the marriage, in the safe place where it's supposed to be enjoyed, is taken out of it. You
can't enjoy it. And I think the most important thing is that it just drives you away from God.
Yeah.
And what it does is it uses guilt, you know?
Yeah.
We know now that the enemy uses guilt and shame like no other person. And you know, the reason he uses those things, because he knows if you're guilty and if you're shameful, you can never ever do what God wants you to do with your life. Realizing that it just takes you far from God, and when you realize that you're far from God, you become scared of God. You become afraid to speak to God. So now you don't have a relationship with God. So now you're carrying this baggage on your own, and God just wants you to give it up. God just wants you to say, I've done this. This is what I've done. This is who I am. Lord, give me a new heart. Give me a new mind. Make me a new person. Create me after your likeness. And just being able to do that, it just gives you a breath of fresh air. And like Mpoomy said, it allows us to now start building the right way, to start seeing sex as this beautiful thing that God created for humans to interact, to worship him, to procreate. It's like, it's so useful. I mean, in the last video we spoke about how amazing it is. Like, it's such a useful tool in a marriage, you know, and it's not something that you can live without. So that's why it's important that you make sure that your idea of it is correct, and that you come into a new relationship or a new marriage. I say new relationship because I feel like when you're starting, if you guys have made mistakes like we have, if you're starting a new relationship, you need to look at it differently and don't see sex as, like Mpoomy was seeing it, as a control thing. As a guy, don't see it as this thing, this prize that you're trying to win, you know. Look at it as something that God has reserved for you to enjoy with a person that you truly want to build a life with.
In the context of marriage. Because like Pastor Mike Todd says, marriage is the container. Yes. And sex is like a fire. And you know, a fire, if it's just let loose, it can destroy. But if you put it in like a container, it can light up a room. It can be a spark. Guys, this is my man.
No, that's Mike Todd. I'm not taking any credit.
But the way you say it.
But you know, so we look at it like that now, and sex is a fire, and it's a crazy fire, but you need to use it in the container, which is marriage. And so a lot of times when you're growing up, you feel like abafundisi be great.
While you're there, can I actually jump in while you're there? I think the problem with that, I read a lot of comments, and Christians are conditioned to try and sound above another person.
Righteousness.
Righteousness. So that is how sex has always been preached to us, with a self-righteous thing. And I think that's why that's why God uses the unusable, because I feel like God of all people want me to come and speak about this.
I'm obviously not qualified.
But it's because we can speak with empathy
and honesty
instead of saying don't have sex, that's it. If you have sex, you go to hell.
That's not the full story. That is a truth, but it's not the whole truth. And I think as Christians, we need to learn to bring the gospel and understand that the gospel is for those who are sick and needy. Like, if this was for perfect people, there would be no need for it. You know, hospitals are there for sick people. They're not there for healthy people. So when healthy people preach their health to other people, it doesn't do anything to the sick. You know, in fact,
it turns them
off. It makes them feel envy and jealousy and anger and all these things that aren't godlike. So our goal and what we try to do is to make sure that we show to you guys that we just like anybody else. We just as messed up. We have issues. I have a temper. I'm not perfect. If we had to list our marriage, you would be shocked. You'd be like, how? You know, but at the end of the day, God still uses us, and God still has a plan for us. But it's kind of like constantly going back to God and giving our lives to him and saying, God, look, you gotta take control. Because on our own, we can't do it. On my own, I can't do it. You know, I'm a man like every other man. So I go through what every other man goes through. But with God, it's every day. Every day I wake up, Mpoomy can attest to this. Every day I wake up and I pray and I ask God to give me strength for that day. Because we are nobodies, you know, but we know someone who's incredible and who can change lives. And it just starts with just kind of opening up and saying, God, take away my shame, take away my guilt, heal me of everything that I'm suffering from, and make me new, and just taking it from there.
You mentioned something earlier about how it drives you away from purpose, and we actually spoke about this, that I think it's when we were speaking about what God can't heal, what you don't show him. And we've really been on a journey of so much truth to as a couple, as a family. And you realize that if we don't speak about things to God, I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to go on a public platform and announce that, hey, I have a drinking problem, but God is healing me. But to just be able to confess that the problem is that if we aren't able to come to terms with what God with what we've done, with our shame and our guilt, God can never use us.
Yeah.
Because every time now you have to, let's say God sends you to speak to somebody or to do something, you're thinking, yo, but is
You
all
disqualify yourself.
You disqualify yourself because you're thinking of what you did last night or 2 weeks ago. And God does not call perfect people, and this is not to excuse sin or encourage a life of sin. You realize that as you fall in love with God, that's why when the disciples asked Jesus which is the most important commandment, and he said it's to love God, because the minute you love God, you want to obey him.
Exactly.
So we don't start by obeying God then loving him. We first love him, and the more you fall in love with him, the more you want to live for him.
Exactly.
So it's so important that we come face to face with our sin, with our shame, with our guilt, with our trauma, with our experiences, with what has happened to us, so that God can be able to use that however he wants to use that. Otherwise, the devil will condemn you. He will keep you he will keep you stuck because you're just dwelling in what you did as a 16-year-old girl. You know, I used to always question that, oh my gosh, God, I've done such terrible things. How will you ever use me? How will you ever use me? And I just, I disqualified myself. But the minute you come clean with God and say, God, here I am, like you said, it's an everyday thing. It's not a once off, I repent, now I am holy, sanctified, life is good, now you're perfect. It's every morning going down and say, God, I need you, because without you, my flesh is weak. My eyes are weak. The things that Paul writes that the things that I want to do, I don't do, but the things I'm supposed to do, our flesh is so weak. That's why we have to run to God every single day and say, God, help me. So if you're someone like me who kept repenting and saying, God, I don't want to have sex anymore, but then next thing you find yourself in between sheets you're not supposed to be in, I'm here to tell you that it's I was listening to a sermon by Frederick this morning, and he said it was easier for God to take the Israelites out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of them.
Israelites.
In other words, it's easier for God to change your circumstances than to change your heart, your habits. He said habits.
Yes.
So God can forgive you. God does forgive you. He can give you a new heart. He can forgive you. He can save you. He can wash you in your blood, spin you 7 times. But to change your habits, that's on you. That's where free will comes in. We have
and
to
it's a
change
tough process. It's not easy, because it means unlearning everything you've ever known.
It means that if you're in a sexual relationship, maybe you have to end that relationship. Maybe you need to stop visiting guys at their places, because once you taste sex,
because it's quarantine,
and also once you taste sex,
it has a pull on you.
Going back is very going back is very hard. So put boundaries in place. If you know that a kiss on the lips tests
is
you,
a trigger for you,
don't do it. Don't do it. We all have certain limits, so don't do it. As a guy, if you know that midnight you and your phone, it's pornography, then maybe put your phone in the other room.
Get a 100 phone.
Put measures in place to help you, because as much as God will forgive you, will change your life, you need to be part of that process. You need to make the change. And
you have to do your work. Lastly, I just want to say something that I heard. We were watching Pastor Mike Todd last night, and he just said something really, really interesting. And he said, so the definition of darkness in Hebrew is ignorance. And so that's the last thing I want to bring up, is to say, enlighten yourself by getting knowledge in whatever you're trying to do. Get knowledge, read up, watch sermons, watch motivational talks, watch whatever that you need to encourage you. People who've been through what you've been through. Mpoomy knows how much I love Kirk Franklin, because I see myself in Kirk Franklin. And if you don't know Kirk Franklin's story, you need to go research Kirk Franklin's story. Then you know my story. You know my full story. But it's just enlightening yourself. When you live in darkness and you become ignorant, and the devil controls that realm. That's his playground. When you don't know what you're doing, when you're going around, like she said, from bed to bed to bed, and you're jumping in relationships you shouldn't be in, the devil is having a field time.
Like
it's like it's a party for him, because that's where he operates. But when you start to enlighten yourself and you start to invite God as the light, and light means knowledge in Hebrew, you start to know more. You start to understand, okay, this is why izinto zami zingahambi. This is why izinto zami zingahlangani. Every time I try to do this, it doesn't work. It always ends in pain. It always ends in disappointment. It's because it's because there's like you said, there's holes on your life, and there's things that you're not doing. You're not being completely honest with God, and God can't use you if you're not completely honest with him. That's his requirement to you, is that you need to let go of everything and confess it all to God, and then he can start to use you.
Anyway, so we make these videos, like we said, to just help you out, especially if you're on your single journey. We don't want you to make the mistakes we made. We don't want you to fall in the trap of the enemy, and we want when you go into marriage, to have a good start. Be it start with counseling, whatever it needs. Get rid of all the baggage, deal with all the childhood trauma, get rid of sexual sin. That is the one sin God says you sin against your own body. You sin against yourself, you know. So we encourage celibacy. We encourage sex within marriage. And we just, and I think for a lot of guys and a lot of girls, we need to, like Pastor Mike Todd said, go back to the manual. Why did God create sex? What is it about sex? And why has the devil spent so much effort into polluting sex? So we hope you enjoyed this video. We hope it helped you. Send it to everybody, your teenage brother. Everybody needs to see this, even if they're 14 years old, because it starts really, really, it does. So we love you guys. Take care.